Hello again. It's Dr. Slottick, and I'm back to tell you a bit about one of my favorite writing projects, the literacy narrative. A literacy narrative is an autobiographical story about your journey in some form of language or communication. Now, you see these a lot in writing classrooms because they help students reflect on their literacy experiences and help instructors get a sense of your relationship with language and literacy. I assign them in almost every class I teach because it helps me learn about students' literacy histories, and I can use that to inform my teaching. But however, you don't always see these in the classroom. Some examples you may be familiar with are the movie My Fair Lady, as well as parts of the memoirs of Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Franklin, and Malcolm X. A lot of times when you see literacy talked about in literacy narratives, they're referring specifically to verbal or written language, but it doesn't have to refer to verbal or written language. Literacy scholar James Paul Gee defines literacy as mastering the communication, values, and unwritten rules of a community. Another writing professor, Anne Ruggles-Geer, narrows this down into a quote which you'll find on your project prompt. Literacy means joining a specific community through understanding the issues it considers important and developing the capacity to participate in conversations about those issues. Let's look at an example to illustrate these points. So something you're all familiar with is the UNK community or the LOPR community. So there is some reading and writing involved. If you're a student, you need to read textbooks. If you're an instructor like I am, you need to read documents like course schedules and degree audits. You also need to know how to get around campus if you're a residential student, and you need to know the names of the buildings. But it also involves things like dressing in blue and gold on game days and being part of the community in that way. Even body language like throwing up a LOPR is involved in being literate in this UNK LOPR community. Other examples are specific sports teams when you have to learn how to read playbooks but also need to learn how to function as part of the team. A religious organization, sororities, fraternities, academic majors, or any other group or community that you're a part of. And so when you write your literacy narrative, if you want, you can focus on this type of literacy of getting to be a part of a specific community. Now let's talk a little bit more about what literacy narratives look like specifically. So we're going to look at the 4 things that we're going to analyze when we look at each genre in this class. The first is the thesis, argument, or purpose. So this literacy narrative genre might be different for you because literacy narratives usually don't have a thesis. Instead, think of them more like a story, and the purpose is to entertain the audience and share your story. However, some literacy narratives can have an argument. For example, let's look at Frederick Douglass's Learning to Read and Write, excerpted from his autobiography. He tells a story of how, as a child in slavery, he secretly learned to read and write despite the anti-literacy laws in pre-Civil War America. He then tells us how, when he gained literacy, it helped him more clearly see the injustice of slavery and inspired him to escape. Now, this is an autobiographical story, not an argument paper, but that doesn't mean there isn't an argument. In telling his story, Douglass is making a point about the intelligence and humanity of enslaved people, and by extension, making an abolitionist argument. See if you can find the underlying arguments in some of the examples you'll read in this unit. Second thing we're going to look at is audience. Now, like I mentioned earlier, classroom audiences are pretty common for literacy narratives, but some of them do gain wider readership or viewership, like the ones I mentioned earlier. And what you do in terms of language, organization, format, things like that, depends on your audience and your purpose, so you need to narrow that down pretty early on. Next, we're going to look at register and style. And again, this is going to depend on your context. If you're writing for an educated audience of adults, your register or your style of writing might be more formal, with complex sentences and ideas. Now, if you're writing for children or young adults, it's going to be simpler. If you're creating a video literacy narrative, your tone is likely to be more conversational since you'll be speaking or reading from a script. In any case, the tone in literacy narratives is likely to be more personal than what you're used to seeing in most academic writing. You can even incorporate humor, slang, and other elements to make it sound like your voice. Last thing we're going to look at is research and evidence. Now, literacy narratives don't involve research most of the time because the evidence is going to be your own experiences. Now, there are exceptions, like one of the readings you'll do in this module, How to Tame a Wild Tongue by Gloria Anzaldúa. She brings in quotes from other authors and scholars, as well as some information about language. You are free to do this in your own literacy narrative. It's not required, but make sure that if you do bring in any outside research that it is cited. So let's talk about what's going to happen the rest of this module. You're going to have some readings and some video texts to look at before completing your discussion board activity. The first reading is some general information about writing literacy narratives, and the rest are examples. Then you'll have some short answer questions, and with these, we're not looking for a right or a wrong answer, but we are looking for some critical thinking. Your project then asks you to create your own literacy narrative, and you have the option to do a video or written narrative. More information is posted in the project prompt. You'll submit a rough draft of this project for peer review, and there are more details about that on Canvas. And then you'll submit the final version and answer some short reflection questions at the end of the module. Thanks for taking the time to learn more about literacy narratives. If you have any questions, you can direct them to your instructor. We'll see you in Module 3, where your intro video will be narrated by another UNK English professor, Dr. Seth Long. Have a good day.